There are journalists, and then there are those who redefine the word. Alex Crawford is one of them, a multi-award winning special correspondent for Sky News. Alex has reported from the front lines of Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, Ukraine, and many other places. She's been smuggled across borders, taken enemy fire, and yet her journalism remains unwavering, sharp, human, and deeply committed to the truth. On this episode of my Journalism Toolkit, we sit down with the woman whose career is a masterclass in courage, clarity, and conviction. Alex, welcome to my Journalism Toolkit.
Oh, thank you, Jamal. That was such a lovely intro. I don't feel like I deserve it.
Thanks, Alex, for joining us. Let me start by asking you, how did you get into journalism, and how did you end up going to crazy places and reporting from war zones?
Well, first of all, I never intended to end up doing this, reporting from war zones. I never even thought of that. I wanted to get into journalism. I didn't really think it was a profitable career, but I joined my local newspaper after applying to every single newspaper local newspaper that I could find in Britain. I'd only been in Britain a couple of years, and had been to school in the south of England after spending most of my life in Zambia, Zimbabwe and Nigeria. So I felt odd in England and very a fraud applying for journalism, which seemed to me to be just a really nice, interesting career. And I got turned down by every single local newspaper in Britain, apart from one, which was a weekly newspaper, and a Scottish editor who sort of said, come down and meet me, because I was up in Lancashire at that time, in north of England. And I met him completely, an 18-year-old who didn't know diddly squat, and he gave me a chance. And because it was a very small weekly newspaper, it had a circulation of 13,000 people. 12,900 seemed to feel empowered to write into the newspaper every week, complaining and badgering reporters for not getting it right and not getting the names spelt correctly and not knowing which road they lived on. That you very quickly learned sort of essential rules of journalism, which is make sure you get the little details right as well as the big details.
So you were persistent from the beginning. You didn't give up when other media's turned down on you. And I guess that's one of the key things for a journalist, is being persistent.
I think that is definitely a lesson and a skill. I don't know whether it qualifies as a skill, but it definitely is a personality trait which you probably need in spades if you are a journalist, because I mean, it's even worse now.
Yeah.
It's like there are whole countries, presidents, all sorts, who just trying to stop you from doing your job. So persistence is the only way forward, I think.
And then frontline reporting, or war zones, or foreign correspondence. How did you get into that?
Wow, that was a long journey, because I had a very long apprenticeship, really, because I went from local newspapers that they trained me. They sent me to NCTJ course, and I did, I took 2.5 years because I hadn't been to university. I did it as a school leaver. I ended up, which basically the apprenticeship meant that you worked whilst you were training. And it was just a very good foundation. And then from there, my editor wrote me a very good reference so that I could apply. I applied to the BBC. I got onto their local radio training thing, and they sent me to Television Centre to do their training thing. I ended up on the BBC trainee scheme with a whole load of young Cambridge and Oxford, young things, and without a university degree, feeling very inadequate, but being given an absolutely really first-class training. And then I felt swallowed up in the BBC because it was so big even then. I mean, it's huge now, but it felt it was huge. I thought I'd die in a corner of a cupboard one afternoon during a shift, and no one would find me for about 25 years. So I left then in my early 20s and went to TVAM. I spent a year there, which was very problematic and stressful because they went on strike. And then Sky started, and I ended up in Sky. It was at that time of my life when I was starting a family, and so I applied for lots of foreign reporting jobs because that's sort of what interested in me. All the interesting stories seem to be outside of the British Isles. I mean, there were some interesting stories in Britain because at that time there was the IRA were very active, and the local, if you could call it local, the sort of hostile environment was Northern Ireland. And so, I guess that was my first, my very first thing was when I did my, I was in South Africa, and I did a kind of work experience with the Mail there, which was quite an introduction to violence, and which was just run of the mill at that stage. And then, working with Sky, and it was a long road to get to an actual foreign correspondence job, very long road. But for me, ideally it would have been great if this had all happened 20 years ago or 30 years ago, but it doesn't always happen the way you want it to. And I guess I look back and think of all the things that I've learned, and it's given me a very solid base. But it took an awful long time to get to be a foreign correspondent. And then my first actual posting, not my first foreign trip, but actually being in a country, living and working, was India, which was, obviously on the doorstep of Pakistan and Afghanistan, which were exploding at that time with Taliban and lots of terror attacks in India itself. So there was suddenly went from 0 to whatever 160 miles per hour full on, and that's sort of how it moved in that direction. But I think there was a very long lead up. And I think today that the sort of young journalists of today, want to step straight into it and think it looks very easy, and it's very it is rewarding, and maybe it looks rewarding, but you need a lot of preparation to get to that point. I think otherwise you're gonna fall flat on your face in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, I think that was my next question, actually. I see a lot of young journalists who want to come into the newsroom and straight away go into foreign correspondent, and you sometimes tell them, calm down, be patient. You need to get the basics right. You need to build your foundation. And as you said, it helps you later when you travel around.
I think apart from learning by living in lots of basically seismic events and historic events, you're just learning about, you're just growing as well. And I think there's a real danger with the loss of regional newspapers and regional radio stations and community radio stations, that we've lost a lot of the training grounds which we used to have for young journalists. And a lot of the guys that are coming through, having done journalism degrees, and they've not even spoken, they've not done vox pops, they've not spoken to local councillors, they've not done a town council meeting, they've not tried to turn a local community event into a front page story for their local newspaper. And they might seem, well, they obviously do seem mind-numbingly boring to the young generation of journalists because they don't want to do it. But they are real learning grounds for how you make your mistakes in a very, very much smaller arena, because everyone's going to be making mistakes. Yeah. And I think I look at the new crop, and sometimes I think maybe they're a little bit timid because they're naturally worried about making mistakes, and they haven't got. Sometimes they've got too much confidence with arriving at an international television station, but not enough confidence to really grab it by the scruff of the neck and be brave, do some courageous journalism. And I think we've lost a lot by not doing the foundations. Because, I mean, if we liken it to something like Olympic training or racing or running or marathon running, you've got to do the training to be good at it, to have a long career in it. I don't think there's any way around that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think my route to journalism was I had to go to college and university, and I did the same thing. I worked at the local newspaper while I was studying, and then because I'm from Somalia, naturally the next step was to go to Somalia and start from there rather than from here. I want you to take us through, how do you decide what stories to do? How do you go about it, and who decides, and what process do you go through?
Well, sometimes events decide. I mean, I've just come back from Syria, and I didn't have that on. It was a place that I wanted to go to again, because I hadn't been there for a while, but it wasn't on my list. I had a list of 3 other trips that I was planning, and that wasn't on it until everything started exploding around the south of the country, and Israel joined in and started bombing Damascus and military installations, and we just got on a plane the next day. Well, we tried to get on the plane that day, and it wasn't possible because of the connections, so we went first thing the next morning. So events shaped going there. It seemed an obvious one to me, a no-brainer, because it looked like there was a lot of killing going on. There was lots of bombing. There was an outside country getting involved, a new government, a controversial government, and it had all the ingredients that was obviously likely to become. It had geopolitical importance, humanitarian importance. It seemed like it was definitely one to go for. Deciding more long-term ones takes a bit of planning, and also a bit of, I guess, what you're interested in. So I'm interested in women's rights in Afghanistan. I'm interested in, because I was brought up in Africa, because I've spent a lot of time there, worked in my professional career in there for many years. I've got a lots of interest in various different countries in Africa, and I've just recently come back from Somalia, where I'd covered in 2017 the start of ISIS, and they were telling me, they were about, when I first heard about it, they were about to launch a new campaign to root out ISIS, which had grown and grown and grown, and the US Senate was talking about it being the global headquarters of the Islamic State. So it's moved. The world thought they'd crushed it in Iraq and Syria, this group, and it was re-emerging in various parts of Africa. So I thought that was interesting, and also had lots of global implications. So it's sort of done like that. I think. I mean, Afghanistan, Gaza, these areas, I've got huge interest in them. A big personal part of my soul is invested in them, but I'm struggling to get into either of those areas.
So the ones that events shape, like Syria, for people who don't understand, you take a flight from here and go there, or you prepare as you travel, or you have contacts there, or how does it work?
Well, I've worked in and out of Syria for the last 15 years. So I have got very solid connections with fixers who, we call them fixers. He's a very good friend now. We're very, very good friends, and he didn't start as a journalist. He was a headmaster who I bumped into, spoke English, helped me, was very driven by truth and honesty and wanting to get and a certain patriotism for his country. And he was a refugee for many, many years in Turkey, where I now live. So I've worked with him many, many times, and so that meant I had very, very good network of people who could help me through him and through the stories that I've done. Because for many years we spent time getting into Syria and working in HTS areas, which is the group that the current president formerly belonged to and was the leader of. And I met him when he was head of HTS. So deciding right now to go meant that at that particular point we got access quite quickly and easily. I'm not sure it'll carry on in the future because I think they've reined all of that into a number of journalists now, foreign journalists in particular. But hopefully things will calm down a bit in the future. But I think all trips like that take a lot of planning. It's knowing who's there, having trusted people that you can work with, planning ahead for unexpected eventualities like where are you going to sleep, what should you bring with you by way of medical equipment, by way of food, even water purification tablets, because we didn't really know what we were going into, so we had to cater for a number of different eventualities. And as it happened, the entire time we were there, we slept on floors of people's houses who we didn't even know, sometimes you're just beholden to the kindness of strangers.
How do you negotiate access to meet people for a place like Syria or Somalia?
Every story and every country has different challenges and different, it won't be the same. Even if I go back to Syria next week or in a year's time, it won't be the same. But the bedrock is the same. Is that in Syria, for instance, have a very, very good contact in three different very good contacts from different groups. So one might be close to the current government. One might be close to the transitional government, which was before the current government, but against Bashar al-Assad. And one will be my former headmaster friend who has worked with me through all of this over many years. But that knowing people on the ground is absolutely key, who will either personally knowing them, there's nothing like it, or getting a recommendation from someone else or a trusted person who's passed on to you by someone you trust. Sometimes, if you're going into a strange area that you've never been to before, you sometimes have to put your faith in people you've not worked with before. In Somalia, I'd worked with a number of the people that I'd worked with back in 2017 are now in senior positions. It's nearly 10 years. One of them, who I spoke to when I was doing the story then, is now the head of the army. So, and he's been promoted to be general. And another one is they've risen up through the ranks and they're in counter-terrorism. So that's helpful because they remembered me. But obviously, the first time they didn't know who I was, and that's when you have to, rely on a local coordinator or conduit who will make the introduction at least, and then it's up to you to prove your worth.
As you said, the key is to keep that contacts and relationship with the people that you meet first time who might help you 10 years later. How do you manage that? You travel to so many different countries.
I think it matters how you work on the ground. You will remember them, they will remember you. If you fall out, if they don't like the way you're working or you don't like the way they're working, you're probably not going to be a good fit in the future. But if you stick to a certain, you know, if your integrity is obvious, if you behave honestly and you behave with dedication, then whoever you're working with, if they're a similar person, they would recognize that. And that's not a sort of pat yourself on the back type thing. It's just a normal way of living. You know, treat people well, they'll probably treat you better. You know, and they'll respond to that. And a lot of these stories, remember, the people want their stories to be told. If you know, and therefore they have a motivation to help you. And when if they believe in your work and believe in you, and you strike up a rapport, then there's no issue. You know, I don't keep in touch with them on a daily basis. Sometimes it might go, you know, 6 months or a year. But I know I could text, you know, someone in Cameroon who I can't remember the last time I texted him, but he would respond straight away and was, hey, how are you? Good, how's it going? And he'll say, when are you coming back, Alex? Come back. We've got so many stories. And I said, well, what stories are they? And, you know, let me know if you think, you know, we can come. And that's kind of how it works. I mean, I haven't got massive amount of contacts in Europe, for instance. I'd be starting from scratch going to Italy or I mean, I did do a story in Spain about climate change, and I'm, you know, even if that guy couldn't help me this time, he would pass on someone else who could. Do you know what I mean? Because the journalist community is quite an inclusive one. If they recognise fellow journalists who want to do, you know, good work.
And as you said, it's about how you treat them, and they remember you. If you treat them well, they treat you better. And then sometimes you go to these places, as much as you prepare yourself, things don't always go as you planned. How do you overcome that? How do you fix things?
Invariably they don't go as planned, and quite often there will be stressful situations or you know, passionate disagreements. Because the people who are left behind have got a lot more at stake and see things in a very different way, perhaps, to the way you as a travelling correspondent might see it. So, and usually there's somewhere in the middle where you can meet. And I personally think I don't want to crash and burn and leave behind me a sort of wasted wasteland of discarded people for the sake of just a story. You know, it's good to learn. It's good to take in other people's views and to see it from their point of view. So, and they raise, you know, I don't know about you, Jamal, but now our company, and I think quite a lot of other media organisations, do various courses which try and get you to counter unconscious bias or to make you alive to what the sort of bear traps that are out there when you're operating as a journalist, like inducements or corruption or misinformation and disinformation and all of those sort of things. And I think the more you listen to particularly the locals, and also really, really key, following your instinct, because your instinct will say, even if you try and ignore it, it'll keep on knocking on your conscience. Is he telling the truth? Is she telling the truth? Is she an honest broker? Is he genuine? Those are the questions that are going through my head all the time. And I tend to follow my instincts. They're not completely infallible, but I rely on them quite a lot, especially as far as judging people are concerned. So when the unpredictable happens, and that could be all sorts of things, like not having anywhere to stay and it's 9 o'clock at night, or suddenly coming under attack in the, you know, whilst you're just sitting there quietly, you know, behind a car, which is what happened with us in Sweden. That's when a lot of your instinct and your training and your experience kicks in, your muscle memory kicks in, and that's why it's dangerous to go to these places or do any story if you hadn't done the training and got a few hours on the clock. Because do you want your career really to end up with a terrible injury, age 26, or a terrible mental trauma, age mid-20s, before you've even really begun your life? You want a long career, so let's prepare for it and pace yourself, and don't make horrendous mistakes which will lead to you doing nibs for the next 15 years or being an outcast in the industry. You want to have longevity.
Also, as a journalist, your instinct is to push it. And if you have that training, that foundation, you know when not to push things. And how do you get that right when you are in the field?
Well, I mean, because I think to the uninitiated, hearing, oh, you've got to push, you've got to be persistent, that doesn't mean you just you burst through doors that are shut tight. You've got to do everything with a certain, I personally think, there are times when charm and politeness is definitely required, and respect, and there are maybe sometimes when a little bit more forceful demands are required. When I was a little bit younger, and maybe even now, I think as a female, there was definitely the impression that you wouldn't, you can't possibly know what you're going into. You'll definitely be scared. You won't be able to cope. You're not strong enough. There's definitely, and so for women, that's an obstacle to overcome. Likewise, I'm sure for young men, because I see how they react to the younger or the middle-ranking men that I'm middle-aged. I don't want to use middle-aged, but the slightly older men, they're seen possibly, depending on their physical appearance, as threats. Physical threats, or potential issues, problems, and so that's something they've got to overcome. But this is why working in those environments isn't straightforward. You have to build trust, and you have to build it quickly. Everyone, I think, especially like, for instance, having to negotiate checkpoints or talk to governors to get through this particular area, or speak to a militia commander. They're quick. They're pretty quick at sizing people up as well. So if you come over as too belligerent, too aggressive, too timid, or unsure, that you're not going to get anywhere. You have to exude a little bit of something, and you're not. Some of that is learned, and some of that is innate.
Also, I think one of the key elements is respecting that local cultures, that the fabric of that particular society, not coming from here saying, I am from the Western world, and this is how we do in the Western world, and I will do it my way. But you have to respect the locals and how they live and how they operate, and that's very important, isn't it?
I think that's crucial, really, really crucial, and you're not gonna get very far if you don't respect and realize that you are the foreigner. You and you come, if you're looking a certain way, with a certain color skin, there will be certain perceptions about you. And if you happen to be white in a certain part of the world, if you don't behave respectfully, you will get nowhere. Because what I feel is much better is if you confound all the prejudices, show people that you're ready to learn, you want to learn, you're there to tell the truth, that you want to be respectful and to adhere to the whatever they want to, the rules or the traditions that they expect, because why should you be any different? You are the one that's the interloper here. You are the one that is relying. And what absolutely staggers me, and again it did, and in Syria, is how people who do not know you at all will open up their homes, feed you with food, which they may or may not even have enough for their own family, empty out downstairs so that you can sleep there, provide you with covers and security and water and food if they can. That staggers me. And also it humbles me, really humbles me, because it's very inspiring to meet these people who have got nothing to gain by being kind and helpful. Absolutely nothing. And yet there's one particular man opened up, two sets of families opened their houses up to us. They saw that we were obviously foreigners. Come in, I want to give you some food. At that time, I thought, we don't really have, I'm not sure we've got time to sit and eat food, but we hadn't eaten anything all day or from the night before. And the fixer said, I think we should go in, because it's rude to turn him down. And he'd already obviously started the whole preparation. So we went in, and he'd invited a load of other people. There were some emergency workers there as well, from the White Helmets and from the Red Crescent, and us as the only journalists. And he invited everyone in and made a whole banquet of rice and chicken for everybody. It was staggering. And then I mean, the others were Syrians, but they were working obviously in that area doing humanitarian work. That they left, and we didn't have anywhere to stay. And he said, and no electricity, our batteries are running down, everything was going out of, losing power on everything. Stay. And I ended up sharing a bedroom with his daughter. I mean, and the daughters were amazing. They're tiny little things. And they gave me little bracelets and, fussed around me and brought me toothpaste and said, please have a shower. We hadn't showered for 3 days. It was just staggering. And that actually makes the job really, really, really satisfying, meeting strangers who I may never meet again, but will have a little place in my life's history always. When I came back, my own children were saying, where did you get those bracelets from? I said, they gave them to me. They not only opened up their homes and let me sleep, next to their daughter, they gave me presents for doing it. Amazing.
And as you said, I think that human kindness, we see so many horrible stories and we talk to victims, but you also remember that human kindness, how amazing humans are in those circumstances, isn't it?
Oh gosh, I mean they make a real impact. And like you see, I mean, like Jamal, you see, because I've seen a lot of the stories you've done, and I thought, oof, particularly in Somalia, but you sometimes see evil up close and personal. You see a lot of violence, a lot of needless death, sometimes torture and horrible things happening, rape and just some terrible, awful things happening. But there's much more good than there is evil. And the staggering kindness and consideration and generosity of people, that I can remember in almost every different story that I've done, way back to when I was a teenager or early 20s. And one of the first stories I did was about a young woman who'd got into incredible debt. I think she was £6,000. It was a huge amount of money to her, crippling, and in those days, just a huge amount of money to me too. And someone saw the story, which was a very down bulletin story, and sent in a cheque to cover wipe out the whole debt. And I thought, wow, Journalism can be a real force for good, you know, and the job offers you the privilege of seeing these, having access to people who you would never ever meet normally, or I wouldn't.
Yeah.
And them showing staggering bravery, courage in helping you, and generosity even when they have nothing. And I find that a lot of the motivation in continuing to do the work in this industry.
Yeah, certainly. That's, I think, what many of us keep us going. And then you work in the field, you put the story together, you air it, and then the sort of post-transmission. Some stories get good feedbacks, others you get negative feedbacks, and especially these days with social media. Can you take us through what happens, the good and the bad?
There's not, I think on social media, there's not a huge amount of good feedback. It tends to be quite negative, especially on X.
Yeah.
Very toxic, very vicious, often incredibly personal. It's. I mean, you have to be quite robust mentally to withstand some of the arrows being fired your way every time. Particularly, I mean, it is actually in quite a lot of stories, but I've never ever experienced it quite so much as over Gaza and the coverage of Gaza. There is a serious amount of toxicity about any of the coverage about that. Yeah, and that can be. I you know, can't really claim to be as robust as I would like over that. You have to find a way somehow of being strong and getting yourself through it, because otherwise it will just break you. And obviously it's not just Gaza, but that's a particularly contentious. It seems to draw out the worst in people, particularly on social media platforms, and it's infected all of them. It's just like, I hardly use Facebook, it's on there. I thought Instagram was quite gentle, it was on there. X was just exploding with all of this. But I think that's the new world now. And I notice it's not just that particular story. It's spread over into a number of other stories, and that seems to be the modus operandi of dealing with journalists. And I think that's been led by, unfortunately, the tone has been set by prime ministers and presidents who have consistently undermined journalists and journalism and fired cannonballs of venom at media organizations and people and, leading figures in journalism. And even if you're not a leading figure, to try and spread that none of us can be trusted and we're all doing fake stories and all just writing lies or broadcasting lies. And that is very, very dangerous. And I just think a much more collegiate approach amongst journalists and journalism is definitely what's needed. And we should all be ready to support fellow journalists who are coming under fire, metaphorically or physically.
That's what you have been doing it on Twitter, I think, for journalists in Gaza. I know you have been under pressure and criticized, but you stood on your ground because you believe in journalism. And as you said, I think we are a community and we must support each other, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's crucial. I honestly think it's critical. And when I see what those Palestinian journalists have done and what they're going through, and not just the character assassinations, but the food deprivation, the bombing, the losing your homes, the moving from place to place, whilst also still working. Mm-hmm. I think we have a duty as fellow journalists to highlight that and try to stand by them. Yeah. I just think we've got a duty. It's like we should do that. My goodness, why isn't everyone doing that?
As a person, how do you deal with all that negative criticism? What would you tell sort of a young journalist who is going into the media, not knowing what they are getting into?
I think what I'd say first of all is expect it. It is going to happen. You know, you are not going to get through a journalist career which doing some impactful stories without getting criticism. So expect it and prepare yourself for it. Then I think don't take, if you need to be certain in your reporting. You have to have absolute certainty, right? You cannot leave any chink of doubt that you've got something wrong. Because if you have got something wrong, you don't have any defense. And if you're certain you've got things right, you've done it with integrity, and you are absolutely certain about the facts and stick to the facts, then try not to engage in toing and froing with people on particularly X. I think X is a very powerful medium because it reaches a lot of people. So it's not good enough to just say, as you know, some probably well-meaning people say, oh, don't go on Twitter. That's not an option now. There is, you know, it's part of our news world. It's part of exchange of information, and it can be a really good tool. But don't engage with a whole load of people who are bad faith actors. You know, might bring you. It's a bit like, you know, drinking large amounts of alcohol. It might just be it might make you feel good for one drink, but it's going to end really badly. So try and stay off that and stick to facts. Does that mean you shouldn't comment on certain things? Well, personally, I think that's a grey area. Why shouldn't you comment to a certain extent? That's what we're paid for as journalists. You know, our experienced analysis and commentary surely must be worth something, because we're in a field where we're gathering information and working out facts and coming to some sort of analysis, and based on good informed facts or sources or contacts or experience on the ground. So I don't think you should, you know, I think there's room for comment, but be prepared for an awful lot of negative comment, because that will come, especially if there are people who don't like what you're reporting and who don't like what you're saying and who don't like what you're revealing.
I always say to young journalists, with all these negativities, personally, I see journalism as a privilege job. I think it's an amazing profession. What would you say to young journalists, young people who want to get into journalism?
I think I'm absolutely with you on that, Jamal, because I think it's an incredible career and an incredible privilege and an absolute honour, and sometimes a bit of a frightening realisation that your voice can be so much louder than other people, and with that loudness comes a real responsibility. It feels to me to get it right and to make sure that you're doing the right thing, and sometimes that can be even choosing the right story, you know, and once you choose that story, going in the right direction. It's the road is a very, very privileged one, but it's pitted with moral and ethical challenges every single step of the way, and that is part of the excitement as well. That is part of the challenge of life. And that's part of what makes it such a privilege, because this job will take you to places that you never ever dreamed of. Yeah. I never thought I'd ever get to Timbuktu. I didn't even know it was a proper place, you know, when I was 14 or something. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I never thought I'd be, you know, talking to the Taliban when they were being hunted and you know, trying to overthrow the international troops. I never thought I'd be banned by them years later. It's a real journey of discovery and just a massive lifelong education. And I think you have to go into it knowing that you are very, very privileged to be doing this job, and you will never, ever stop learning about it. And don't think you know it all after a 3-year university course or even a 20-year career on the road, because that will be the day that you fall down that big bear trap which is laid for every journalist, where you make terrible mistakes that you regret forever. You know, I'm constantly fearful I'm going to get it wrong. Yeah. It's going to be, you know, am I going to make the wrong turning down this street where there's a suicide bomber, or am I going to believe the wrong person who's just made up this entire story? Those are constant figures of apprehension, ghosts of apprehension that are constantly sitting on my shoulder, warning me, ask questions, don't accept anything, check this, double check that. You know, that's not to say you won't make mistakes, because you will. But learn from them, pick yourself up and enjoy it. Because at the end of the day, what a job, what a life. It is, I can't really describe it to someone who hasn't tasted a bit of it, but it is the most inspiring, but also depressing life.
Yeah.
And you've got to be prepared to ride both those ponies.
On that positive note, thanks very much, Alex. We'll finish there, I think. Thanks very much for your time, Alex.
Thanks, Jamal. Thank you too.